after the baby was born. She's only got one child. And she had problems after that, nothing serious until then she started to pass out, and no one could find out what was wrong. Scottish danced with her once, and she suddenly felt faint and sat down and lay out on the floor, and she passed out for about 20 minutes. There was a doctor there, took a pulse, the pulse was quite strong. And apparently it happened when she was going out with a dog to mend some fences and on the property there, and so
It's terribly sad.
they were never able to decide what it was that caused it.
James Churchill, was he ever moved to tears?
Yes, quite often when something awful had happened, a ship blew up or that sort. And I felt very sorry for the Navy because it all happened so slow motion. At night, after we came down from watching the film, the first sea officer had to explain what was happening. They're doing the Bismarck battle, and all the positions of the ships put out on the charts on the grand piano, and the circle of uncertainty where the Bismarck must be, and these awful discussions. Why has he altered course? This on wretched captain. His whole career was in the balance because he altered course 5 degrees. The whole thing moved so slow motion, it only moved half an inch on the charts since the night before, you see, this sort of thing. Whereas with the army, started a battle in the desert, no one knew what the hell was going on for about a fortnight afterwards. There was absolute chaos with the signals coming back. No one could say what's happening. You never could criticise anybody. But everything else under the microscope with the Navy is all slow motion. And but when the Hood went down, he was in tears then, and other ships went down. He was very upset. But he had quite a good sense of humour, and he had lots of quite good, amusing stories he used to tell. I wish I could remember them.
Was it a case that Churchill was in charge really of all the forces, or did each?
Oh yes, in every chiefs of staff meeting, he was in the chair, and everyone had to have the answers to anything. If they didn't, they got an awful rocket, and they wouldn't last long if they didn't have the answers. And he really had things buzzing. If he wanted to do something, it jolly well got done, or someone's head would roll, and they knew it. And they really put the best foot foremost to make sure that everything went properly. So,
was there ever a case that he did get rid of someone?
oh yes, several. Well, I mean, he got rid of Auchinleck and other people, the generals who weren't performing, and replaced them. And the same in the Navy. If anyone failed, they were replaced pretty smartly. And he wouldn't brook any sort of inefficiency or any incompetence anywhere. If he wanted an answer, he expected the chap to have the answer there, or if not, to produce it in half an hour or so. And it really made people work. It really did. He was. I was with him on 2 occasions visiting stations, and that was interesting. Coming up from Chequers one day, he wanted to look in at North Weald to see how the Polish wing was getting on. So a lot of discussion to whether they could cope because of the language problem. And when we got to North Weald, the station was waiting outside by the gate. So Churchill begged him to get into the car. We drove slowly into the station, and they were just outside the headquarters building. There was one of these gas alarms that had a triangular metal thing and an iron bar. If you hit this triangle, it was the gas alarm. So Churchill said, "What's that thing?" And he said, "It's the gas alarm, sir." So Churchill got out of the car, got this thing, and started hammering at this. And people started running in all directions and disappearing into court, all coming up with gas masks and going into cellars and things. We got down to the control tower, went up into the control tower, and George said, "Well, now let's see how long it takes the Polish wind to get into the air. Let's time it." And he called out, "Scramble." And the controller called out, "Scramble." Absolutely nothing happened. All these chaps were in a cellar with a gas mask on. And the other always things go wrong. We have a big wing there. And the other time he was coming up from his home in Kent, and he asked to go into Biggin Hill to see the Canadian wing coming back from escorting the first daylight bomber attack by Sterlings on the French factories in northern France. And we were up in the control tower with the Prime Minister, the Commander-in-Chief of Fighter Command, the commander of the group and the station commander, all standing there. And this wing came, it was a grass airfield in those days. Actually, it was at Kenley. And they were coming into land, and there's 3 squadrons in formation. And they were just nicely rounding off to touch down. And a Canadian voice came over the radio, absolutely loud and clear. Even a bloody wing commander needs wheels. The chap had forgotten to put his wheels down. A great roar, the whole lot went right round again and took a great circle. And they came back again and landed right in front of the Prime Minister. Poor chap. There's a fellow called Victor Beamish who was leading it, who was a fellow who spotted the German battleships coming up the channel. And of course the Navy wouldn't believe it. Though a fighter pilot, he wouldn't know a dinghy from a cruiser. But he was right.
What about Churchill's sort of relationship with the Australian Prime Minister, Curtin?
Well, I don't think it was very good, and one can see why. I mean, as far as we were concerned, the thing was to keep in the war. And if Britain had been knocked out, that would have been the end of the war. If the Battle of Britain had lost, the Germans would have taken over the country, they'd have taken over the Commonwealth. I mean, Australia couldn't stand out against Germany. The Japanese were not involved. They were at war, and they wouldn't have come into the war at all if it hadn't been the Americans cutting off their steel and coal supplies, which they needed for their war in China. And a couple of pocket battlers roaming around the coast and bombarding the capital cities would have made Australia surrender anyway, and in no time at all. We'd have then had a SS Gauleiter sitting up in Government House here, and the SS troops, and the Gestapo in the police headquarters, and concentration camps around the place, bumping off the people they didn't want. It would have been a ghastly situation. But no one here believes it, and they were quite happy to believe that it couldn't happen here. And I'm afraid it could have. You see, whether Britain joined Germany in the war against Russia, if we had been defeated, doesn't make much difference. If Germany had been able to attack Russia very early in the spring of 41, using the whole of their army, because they had large forces kept in the west to defend against invasion, and they had something like 2 million men on anti-aircraft duties in Germany. All those guns would dual purpose could be used in the field. All of those would have been withdrawn. The whole of the air force, which was kept there for bombing Britain through 40, 41, 42, that could have all been used on the Russian front. There's no doubt they would have knocked Russia out. They would have then had 1,000 million men under their control with an enormously efficient German organising ability. Their output of steel, every kind of weapon system would have been enormous at very cheap rates, because they'd have paid nothing but slave labour for these people. They would have had the whole of the oil fields in the Middle East under their control. They'd have had the route round the Cape. I mean, the Boers in Africa, South Africa, would be delighted to have the British chucked out, and they'd be delighted to have the Germans there. And they would have approved of the racial policies of the Germans. In South America, they had the Argentine and Chilean countries, ruled by dictators, trained by the Nazis. They'd have been on their side, giving them every possible support. They could have outproduced the Americans about 10 to 1 in every form of weapon system and shipping. Their aircraft designs at that time were way ahead, and the Americans didn't have anything like a Messerschmitt at that time in 40. They didn't have anything like the German bombers, the Junkers 88s. I mean, they'd have been very badly placed and pretty well isolated.
So while you were working with Churchill, did anything come up in respect to the Australians that he said?
Never came up, because when Menzies was there, I wasn't at dinner, so I don't know what went on then. But according to what I heard from the secretaries, they got on like a house on fire. But they were two very similar characters. But what they personally thought of one another, I don't know. No idea. But
and Curtin, once he came in?
Well, it was very sad, really, that the Singapore episode, of course, was a very sad day. But that was really caused by the Washington Naval Treaty, because the Washington Naval Treaty restricted the Royal Navy's development tremendously. It limited the number of battles we allowed, the number of aircraft carriers, on the assumption that the Japanese would be on our side in a future war. So we just didn't have enough to control the German fleet in the Atlantic and cope with it. And of course, when those two battles went out, they had no aircraft carrier, because the aircraft carrier that was supposed to have escorted them ran aground in the West Indies on the way and got delayed. And I don't think it would have made a lot of difference if it had. They probably sunk the aircraft carrier too, because the Navy had no suitable aircraft to compete with Zeros and that sort of thing. But with the Japanese controlling the seas, Singapore was doomed. I mean, you can't hold an overseas post unless you can keep it relieved. The Air Force there needed thousands of gallons of fuel every day, and it meant a tanker going to and fro all the time. Once that was cut off, you had it. It's going to surrender. Whatever people like Keating might think about it, any military man can tell you you can't hold an overseas base unless you've got communications with it. Not for long, anyway.
So during the time that Japan's in the war, Churchill was preoccupied with Europe, or he had the big picture of both?
Oh, he had a pretty good view of everything, I think. But his mind was like lightning. Ideas were coming up all the time. A lot of them were a bit bizarre, but they were worth a thought. The trouble was he didn't have the facilities, and that the service had been so starved in between the war, and they started to expand so late in life that they were completely outclassed by the Germans and Japanese to start with. We had nothing like a Zero fighter except the Spitfires, and they didn't get out to Singapore till later, and right at the end, and only in very small numbers. They were quite useless, really. But see, Churchill saw that we must win the war against Germany. He didn't know whether the Germans were going to get the atomic bomb first, and we just had to. We had to hold out. If we gave in, the whole Commonwealth would have gone. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And quite rightly, I suppose, he saw that the home base was essential to the future development of the war. But we just didn't have the resources in men or materials. But it was the same in Australia. I mean, before the war, people wouldn't vote money for the services. Not a hope. So we were all undermanned and underarmed.
Just with Churchill, you spoke before just about how security sort of intensified, particularly after a fellow had walked in straight up to Churchill with a, as acting suit and a pretend pistol, and said, look, you got to straighten things out. How was the development of security around Churchill? How did it change during the war?
Well, I didn't see any change at all, except to say they smartened up the guards a bit at Chequers, and I don't think there were any plots against him as far as I've heard. I never heard of the Germans trying to. I think Hitler was the sort of person who wouldn't want Churchill bumped off. He'd like to have got hold of him himself after the victory, after his victory, and given him hell. And I don't think he wanted him bumped off before that. But it's amazing. You look at the Churchill speaking on the victory on the VE Day. The support he had in the country was amazing. I mean, everyone realised it was entirely due to him that we survived. No one else could have done it. You can imagine if Halifax or anyone like that had been. They wouldn't have had the drive and the knowledge and the way of dealing with the services that Churchill had. And having one man at the top coordinating the whole defence effort, right through to the production, everything, instead of having it parcelled out to different departments all in charge. And it's just not nearly so efficient.
So how long were you working in this position with Churchill?
About 18 months. I went there in October 1940, and I finished in about, I think it was about April or May in 1942.
You mentioned how Churchill liked hanging on to his staff.
He hated change of staff. Yeah.
How were you able to move on?
Well, I kept on finding about it. The trouble was that when I did get a leg, I went to Duxford and I flew an aircraft and got someone to say I could fly aeroplanes. I went up to the medical board and there was an air marshal as the president of the board. And he classed me as fit for flying light aircraft at home service only, which was no use at all. And when Sholto Douglas came to see Churchill when he was about to take over fighter command, Churchill said to him, well, this is James, he's trying to get back on flying. And so Sholto said, what's the trouble? I said, well, I can't get my medical board raised. And this Douglas part of flying with 2 orbital legs, I've only got one. And because the doctor who signed it was an Air Vice Marshal, none of the other doctors would change it. And of course, Sholto Douglas, so what a big man he was, to Churchill said, oh, I'll fix that, chap, don't you worry. And I got it raised, but it only got raised to home service only because of getting my leg fixed, you see. The other's legs got a lot of trouble. Which wasn't much good because at that time, to get a squadron in fighter command, you had to be ready to go overseas with the squadrons to France when the invasion started. So it cut me out from getting a squadron. So I had these jobs at operational training units, and I was given a delivery squadron out at Croydon, where I spent my day organising flying aircraft around the countryside from squadrons to maintenance units to get modifications done and back to squadrons. So it was quite interesting because one flies a different type of aeroplane every day. One day you'll be flying a Mosquito, next day you'll be flying a Me-10, next day you'll be flying a Mustang or a Tempest or something like that. All the latest aircraft, but it just wasn't operational flying. But the best I could get for that the medical category at that time, which was frustrating, but you know, might have saved my life, I suppose.
So what did Churchill say when you were leaving to go to this?
Well, he gave me a very nice present. He gave me a book. I've got to do with that. He gave me his history of the First World War, which is quite interesting. And I was reading so about Gallipoli on it because it gets a very bad press in Australia. And I was sitting next to a naval historian at a dinner in Canberra about a couple of years ago. And I thought I'd been reading this book of Churchill about the Gallipoli show, and I can't see why it gets such a bad press here. And he said, well, he shouldn't have. And he said the idea was brilliant. I mean, Churchill had this idea that if they could force the Dardanelles, they could send supplies to the Russian army, which were getting very short of everything. And he signalled the commander of the Eastern Mediterranean Fleet, said, can you force the Dardanelles? And the chaps signalled back, yes. The chaps said, go ahead. Well, they went in the first day, and they went about 16 miles up the channel, swept all the mines, and they bombarded the forts and sent Marines up there to blow them up. Then they retired for the night. And when they went in the morning, a minesweeper blew up, the loss of about 20 men, and the battleship got damaged. And they pulled out. I said to this historian, well, why the hell wasn't the Admiral court-martialed and shot? He would have been earlier on. I mean, Admiral Big was shot not pursuing the enemy, not alone pulling out in the face of the enemy. I mean, after all, they were losing thousands every day on the Western Front. What was 26 men in a minesweeper? And he said the Admiral was shot. It was a French Admiral in charge of the minesweepers who pulled out. And he was court-martialed and he was shot, and the chairman of the court-martial, the officer in charge, was his own father. His own father sent his own son to death. Can you imagine? Ghastly thing. Because if they had forced the Dardanelles, they could have bombarded Constantinople, which was the only big city and would have knocked Turkey out of the war and could have stopped any supplies going to Turkey. And, they could have sunk the two cruisers, German cruisers in the Baltic, in the Black Sea, doing such a lot of damage to shipping. And they could have kept the Red Army going, which would have stopped a revolution. It would have been a communist revolution. The whole world would have been different. I mean, Churchill had these visions, but he wasn't always successful in carrying them out. It's rather strange, isn't it, how the world would have changed if we hadn't had a Russian Revolution. When there wouldn't have been if there hadn't been a Russian Revolution, the Germans wouldn't have had that great force of army to go right through to almost to Verdun. That attack wouldn't have happened at all. And the war might have finished a couple of years earlier. Who knows?
So just coming back to you now and your time there, you've left Winston Churchill and you've now moved to where at that point?
Well, I was sent to first of all, a refresher course, and then to St Aston Down, where I commanded a squadron in an operational training unit, flying Spitfires, training Americans for the Eagle squadrons. They were a delightful lot of people. They were very lively people, but quite amusing. I was living in an old rectory, and we used to have the odd chap to dinner every now and then, one of these Americans. And they used to say, gee, this is an old house, and my wife would say, oh, not very old, it was only built in 1320, but the church is old, that's 1140. You know, this sort of thing. It was quite fun. And it was at the last little village in a valley, and beyond us there was a ha-ha at the bottom of the garden, and a lovely view down the valley with a stream running down it, and pheasants and things all over the place. And and it was pleasant flying there, training these people. But then after a few months, I was posted to Annan as chief flying instructor up there. And that was a fascinating job. And I had some funny things happen there. I was living in a rectory, in a manse, I should say. And the first time I had to go out to a dinner in the mess, I asked the minister if I could have the key of the front door, because they went to bed very early, so I wouldn't wake anybody up coming back. He said, certainly not. So when I'd gone, he said to my wife, what do they do to stay up so late? She said, oh, well, they have a dinner and drink wine and have toast, and then after they drink a lot of beer and play mess games and sing a lot of rude songs, he said, I had no idea such barbarous customs prevailed today. And when we had grace at meals, we had to get on our knees by the chair. You couldn't just go like that. You had to get down on your knees before you could say grace. And in the kirk, I didn't go because I was flying on Sundays, but my wife had to go with our youngster. His wife took the roll, and if anyone from the village was missing, the pair of them went straight round to that house afterwards. And they wanted a jolly good explanation why they weren't there. Well, they got a terrific wigging, and if they missed 2 Sundays running, they were going to be stuck off the church roll. Their children wouldn't be christened, and they wouldn't be buried, and they wouldn't be married, or all this sort of thing. No pub was allowed in the village. If you wanted a drink, you had a 5-mile walk down the riverbank to Annan to get a drink. And but there were some interesting characters in the area. I was in charge of the station one Saturday morning. My station was away, and my wing commander was flying, and a call was put through to me from some exasperated woman. There was a woman called Mrs. Brooke. Her husband, Teddy Brooke, was a cotton millionaire, and she was one of the Guinness family. They lived in a huge, great chateau about 5 or 6 miles away from the airfield and about 8 miles out from Annan. And what had happened was that the west wing of this great place was a psychiatric hospital for the services, and an army corporal had shot himself in her husband's study on a Saturday morning. So they rang up the local police station. There was only one old chap on duty. And so he got on his bicycle. He bicycled the 8 miles all uphill to this place. He was 65 and he was about 16 stone. When they saw him coming the last mile up their drive, and they saw him leaning his bicycle against the mounting block and walking up. Her husband was away in London on duty business, and saw him start to walk up the steps to the front door. So she thought to save the butler a long haul up from the back, she'd go and let him in and show him across to the study where the corpse was. And she showed him the study, and he started walking back towards her little drawing room to get on with the letters to her sons overseas in the army. When she heard a tremendous commotion in the study, she rushed back to see what's happening. When she got in there was absolute commotion because when the policeman got in there, he found the house parrot, which in fact was a galah, was sitting on the corpse. And he wanted to put his hand on the heart to make sure Rochette really was dead. And there was this galah sitting there. So he didn't know about galahs, he knew about pigeons. He put his finger on it, the thing get on his finger and just remove it, you see. So anyway, she bit him, and he tried to shake it off, which made it flat, which made her two French bulldogs rush up and each seized a leg. So when she went in, the great hulk man was got a leg attached to a French bulldog, and the galah hanging on his thing. So she disengaged her pets, and she noticed he seemed a bit hot. It's surprising the way he'd bicycled so far. So she pulled the bell pull, and in due course a rather aged butler appeared. She said, "Can you bring the constable a small beer?" He said, I'd like a pint, Mum. She said, "Well, we've only got very strong ale." He said, "I like strong ale, Mum." She didn't like to argue any more, but the only ale they had was audit ale, which her husband had ordered from his college at Oxford some years before, and the butler had ordered 1,000 gross instead of a gross, and so they had the cellar stuffed with the stuff, been there for years, and was getting very potent. Anyway, she went back to writing her letters, and about an hour later she looked out and saw the bicycle still there. She said, "What the hell can you be doing all this time? Straightforward suicide." So she walked back across, she opened the door, and there were two bodies turning out. She had too much of this beer, and he'd passed out. So she rang up the police station, nobody answered the phone. She rang up the local doctor, he was on his rounds in the hills. So she rang up the RAF station and was put through to me. So I sent an ambulance out with the doctor to sort this out. As a result, I was given an invitation to a shoot. And I was asked to bring a friend and bring our lunches. So the mess packed up 2 Spam sandwiches and a bit of Daily Mirror and an apple and a bottle of beer. We arrived outside this great place, and a butler came out with a huge tray to collect our lunches. And we were then piled in. There were 5 Rolls-Royce shooting breaks there to take us out to the shoot. And as they stopped, you were told, "You stand there, you stand there, you stand there." And you just had time to load. And games started coming over thick and fast. You banged away. Of course, the other guests had loaders with a spare gun. But there were 2 other RAF officers from the RAF station at Dumfries. One was a Canadian. He was a huge fellow. It was the best shot I've ever seen in my life. He must have been brought up with a gun in his hand in Canada, because every time he pulled the trigger, something fell. But he'd never been on an organised shoot before. By lunchtime, he'd shot a dog dead and peppered a beater. He was considered highly dangerous and was put out on the flank. And lunch was served in a large conservatory full of potted palms and things. And our 2 Spam sandwiches were put on our plates with 2 gold spoons onto a gold plate like that. And our bottle of beer, wrapped up in a napkin, was poured reverently. The other guests were also eating wigs of grouse, quails and aspic, and little bottles of claret. Well, after lunch, we were in a gravel road in a pine wood, and there were pheasants coming over thick and fast, and the odd hare dashing about, and we were all banging away. And this Canadian on the flank suddenly went bung bung, and 2 pheasants went plop plop down the middle of the road. But the shot fell quite close to an old retired colonel, about 4 up on his left. And this colonel turned down the line and said, "Damn fine shot, sir. Who was that?" He sort of put his hand up, the colonel went, boom, shot him full of lead. I don't know whether it was his dog that had been shot, or perhaps his son had been peppered, but anyway, we didn't have time to ask. So this chap was bleeding rather profusely. We rushed him back to the sick quarters at Annan, which was nearer than Dumfries, and they patched him up. It took a long time pulling all these pellets out of his backside, and we never inquired why this was, and no questions were asked. We never invited again, so we never found out. It was extraordinary behaviour. And the people were pretty hospitable. We were allowed to fish the river, and I fished it for some time. I didn't like it at all. And we had the local mayor of Annan in to the mess for a drink one evening, and he was boasting about the fishing. I said, "Well, I can't fish a damn thing out of it." I was flogged up and down. He said, "Well, you've got to use a dry fly here." No, you can't use a dry. It's got to be a wet fly with a bit of blue and a bit of silver in it. And after that, I had no more trouble. But the story goes up further up the Edens. Just you had to have a dry fly. So anyway, we had a fellow there, another squadron leader, who was a Dutch with me before the war, a fellow called Campbell Cahoon, who was a big raw-boned Scot. And he just married a young girl who ran a pet shop in Cambridge. He took her up to Scotland with him, and the first day off he took her out fishing. And after she'd been sitting on a wet rock for 2 hours watching him flogging this river, she got a bit bored and wanted to go home. And she couldn't make him hear because they were fishing a pool above a fall. So she'd get closer, she took a run and jumped to land on a rock nearer to him, and she slipped and hit her head on the back of the rock. She was washed down and wedged up on the edge of the waterfall, unconscious, with her head hanging over the edge. When she recovered consciousness, he was still fishing. It's always rankled. Every time we went to dinner there's always cropped up, and it always got quite acid. And said, "Well, why didn't you do something about it?" I could see her head was out of the water. And I had at least a 4-pounder on the line, you silly woman. She just couldn't understand, suddenly these English guys. But I was walking back along the bank one evening with empty creel, and I passed the local poacher's cottage. He was sitting outside smoking a pipe, and he said, "Have you had any luck?" That's another thing. He said, "We like a nice salmon." I said, "It's another one." So he went into the house and he came out with a sledgehammer. I thought, this chap's gone dotty. So I kept a fair distance behind him as he walked up the river bank about half a mile, and he jumped out on a rock, put the sledgehammer down to his feet like that, spat on his hands. He picked it up and he boing on this rock. The salmon had floated up like this. Must have been lying under the rock, and the shock wave went through him and stunned it. And he ran down the banks and gaffed it, said, "Aye, there's always a good one there the night." And he showed me how he trained his dog to swim across the river with a string around its collar, go around a tree and come back again. He could put a net across the river, and the river curved both ways, so he could see quite a long way each way. So if anyone came along, he could get it all out of the way before they arrived.
Just coming back to your training, you mentioned I think the American Eagles squadron. You were training them.
Yes.
What planes were you training them on?
Spitfires.
Can you?
They were amusing. They all congregated in a little restaurant in Leicester Square, run by an American, I think. But they were a jolly lot. I saw quite a bit of them. But one of them amused me very much. A fellow called De Haven. He just had a letter from his mother from Oklahoma, saying she'd been sitting up all night fire watching in case of air raid. It must have been very keen, wasn't it? I can't even imagine.
So did you go up with them flying the Spitfires? What was your role?
Oh no, I briefed them when we went up, and I was leading them in formation and showing them different manoeuvres and things. But, no, we only single-seater Spitfires. We had to fly with them.
How were they different to the Brits that flew them?
Well, they were more mature, more self-confident, like Australians. English people, I thought it was going to separate schools from girls or what, but they're not as mature as Americans at the same age, I think. But these people had all done lots of flying in America. I mean, they weren't novices. But they were all very keen. They nearly all transferred to the American Air Force, where their pay was about triple. I used to meet the Americans a bit because my wife's family lived near Duxford, and Duxford was taken over by the Americans Air Force. I used to fly in there occasionally. But one time I landed there and I went to call on well, we'd call him a wing commander. He was a group commander. He called himself a group commander of the fighter group there, which he called the fighter wing. They were flying Thunderbolts. And he'd just been to the Lord Mayor's banquet. And I said, that must have been wonderful, because even in the American mess, the messing was a bit boring after a time. He said, "Oh, to hell with the food and drink. I was introduced by a flunky in silk pantaloons." That made his day. This chap read out the introductions as they came in. But he showed me the films they'd taken on a recent, that morning's raid on some German airfields in France. And it was marvellous Technicolor film, bright, clear, sunny, really beating up these aircraft strewn around this airfield. Absolutely marvellous. God, you must have marvellous camera guns. All we see on our camera guns is a little bit of black shadow bumping about, and sometimes that's a Heinkel 111's notice, and it's a measurement notice or something, because you could only see a little black shadow. They said, "Oh no, they're British camera guns, but we put a fast film in them." Of course, we got the cheapest film they could find. It was a very slow film, so you had to have the aperture fully open, which meant that they could close right down and get really sharp. So, but it was interesting. I said, "It must be very expensive." He said, "Oh, to hell with the expense. You only have a war every 30 years, let's have a good record." How wise they were. I mean, they got these wonderful films they take with the same camera guns.
At this stage, were you hoping still to go into action like
Yes,
Douglas
of course I
Bader?
was, but I wouldn't have much luck. Because everyone had to have a tour on training and other things in between. But, yeah, it's the luck of the draw, isn't it?
And what had happened to Douglas Bader at that point?
Well, he was shot down and taken prisoner. He was very bad luck for him. He had a hell of a time in prison camp. He was always trying to escape. When he was captured, he was put in hospital because he hadn't got any legs. His legs were both damaged. And with the help of some underground, he escaped from there, but they recaptured him. I don't think he got very far without any legs. And the RAF dropped some legs over for him, of course. He had one above knee and one below. There was another pilot in fighting command at the time when I was at Aston Down. He was passing through. There was a fellow called Hodgkinson who'd lost both legs, and he got into finish his flying with two other legs. It's terribly difficult. Getting in and out of a bath is difficult with one leg, but getting with no legs, you have to swing yourself in. Getting out again even worse.
So after this initial training of the Americans and being at Annan, what happened to you there?
I was then posted down to Croydon in charge of this delivery squadron. And that was a very interesting job because I got around all the units, all the different squadrons. Of course, the whole of south of England there was an airfield about every 5 miles all along the south coast. And right as far as Cornwall, I went down used to deliver to the French squadrons at Perranporth on the north coast of Cornwall. And that was interesting, worth a while. We used to take a few empty bottles of beer and they'd fill them up with wine for you because they used to get their wine over from Algiers. It just cost a shilling a bottle of red wine. It was only plonk, of course, but it was worth having. I had a funny thing happen when I was at Croydon. I had a young officer there whose wife had to take a specimen to the doctor. And the only suitable bottle she could find was a half bottle of whiskey in. So she put some boiling water in that and used that. And she went in by bus to Croydon to see this doctor. And she got into Croydon, she had about 20 minutes to wait. And she saw a great queue outside a fish shop. She thought, there must be something good in today. So she got in the queue. When she came out, someone had pinched this bottle of whiskey out of her shopping bag. It must have been a nasty shock for him when he poured it out. But I could never understand why the Germans didn't see where the invasion was coming from, because I used to fly them down that coast so much at that time, just before the invasion started. And there were these huge concrete caissons for the artificial harbours being towed down through the channel, round the coast of Kent and off towards the west, one after another, towed by tugs. It must have been obvious where they were going, all to the west, and they could see them across the channel. It's only 25 miles away. It's extraordinary they didn't twig where it was going to be.
While you were at Croydon, what things were you transporting around the country?
Well, we were collecting aircraft from squadrons and delivering them to maintenance units or factories for modifications or whatever. They were bringing things up to date, changing ground sites or whatever. And every morning I had to detail my pilots to various jobs, and we had a transport airplane to go around and collect people or take them to the airfield or whatever and bring them home again. So it was quite a problem. But it was quite interesting flying. Of course, keeping in touch with the pilots on the front line was interesting too, and flying all the different kinds of aircraft. Every time it was different. One day it would be a Spitfire 14, the next day it would be a Mustang, the next day a Tempest or something, or Meteor. It was interesting flying a Meteor as early as that, because I was talking to the pilots of the Red Arrows when they were here, and I was saying, I used to fly a jet in 1944. They were astonished.
We'll just stop there and change tapes.
Well, I'm sorry my memory